Welcome back to the Think, See, Listen channel, where I give it to you raw and uncut and uncensored, unedited, and completely unprofessional. All to give glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Part 7 The Great Reset and the War for the World by Alex Jones. If this is your first time, make sure you go to my channel, click on the playlists. I've got a whole playlist for this book. I'm determined to get this thing done as soon as I can and get it all posted and try to read as good and as entertaining as possible. Welcome to the Think, See, Listen channel. We're gonna jump in where we left off. And where did we leave off? Alright, I'm gonna back up. Now, this book takes a certain view on how globalists will execute their plans, not showing their hand, while working behind the scenes to bring it about. As I read Powell's statement, he sounds like a typical globalist, using language like engaging with the public, elected representatives, and a broad range of stakeholders, which makes me suspect they are further along in their efforts than they admit. China has already rolled out a pilot program for a digital currency as detailed in a January 10th, 2022 CNBC article. China is ramping up its efforts to roll out the digital yuan to the broader population as the country's technology giants like Alibaba and Tencent jump on board, also known as the ECNY. It's designed to replace the cash and coins already in circulation. It is not a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, in part because it's controlled and issued by the central bank. Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency that isn't backed by any central banks or a single administrator. China's digital yuan is a form of central bank digital currency, which many other central banks around the world are also working on, though the Chinese central bank is way ahead of its global peers. This isn't fantasy land. It's already here, and the elites are just waiting for the right crisis or incentives to usher people into the new digital system. As we try to make sense of the Russia-Ukraine war, it's probably useful to ask whether the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, seems to be on the side of freedom or on the side of the globalists. If we accept the idea that the globalists are attempting to seize control of technology, we might suspect Zelensky's motives when he announced an effort in February 2020 to put the state in a smartphone. This is from a Ukrainian publication. Ukraine's president and prime minister on February 6th presented the country's mobile e-governance application, DIA Action, which aims to digitize all government services and play a central role in President Volodymyr Zelensky's state in a smartphone concept. By the end of the winter, a digital passport will appear in the app, which will allow users to travel domestically, conduct banking, and use medical services. This state in a smartphone effort was led by Mikhailo Fedorov, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of digital transformation for Ukraine. He is also a young global leader for the World Economic Forum and was a panelist at the World Economic Forum Scaling Up Digital Identity Systems session. This is how he is described in his biography on the World Economic Forum.
Mikhail Fedorov is Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, the youngest minister in the history of Ukrainian politics. Fedorov, at the age of 30, managed to succeed both with opening his own businesses as well as with leading the country's digital revolution. His most important project as minister of the state in a smartphone, which aims by 2024 to have 100% of all government services available online, with 20% of services provided automatically without the intervention of an official and one online form to receive a package of services. His biography for the World Economic Forum has stated that his most important goal is the state in a smartphone, which aims by 2022 to have 100% of all government services available online. Seems harmless, with 20% of services provided automatically without intervention of an official. Seems scary. Imagine our government automatically removing money from your account or automatically freezing your account based on your right to peacefully protest your political views or your carbon footprint. Fedorov said during his presentation to the World Economic Forum in 2021, "Our goal is to enable all life situations with this digital ID," said Fedorov, adding, The pandemic has accelerated our progress. First of all, people are really now demanding digital online services. People have no choice but to trust technology. We believe that we have to make the best product possible. A high quality product, a product that is so convenient that a person will be able to disrupt their stereotypes, the breakthrough from their fears, and start using a government-made application. Wow! You're talking about a centralized system totally controlled by the government that not only tracks and knows everything about you, but can freeze your account as it sees fit. Not only that, but these Ukrainian digital ID services will also feature vaccination, electronic passports, and Ukrainian COVID certificates. Ukraine was pioneering a system that governments all around the world could use as a template to control their populations. If we look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine with that perspective, do Putin's actions seem as difficult to understand? Imagine all your money is no longer money. It's a credit within a centralized digital system that is administered by the government. It has a fully tracked and traceable serial number. It could be coded to not allow you to buy meat, Bitcoin, air travel, or gold. It could block your ability to buy a pillow from Mike Lindell's company, My Pillow. Or it could be blocked from purchasing products from my supplement store at Infowars.com, InfoWarsStore.com. Now, factor in a digital world ID, a vaccine passport that expires if you're not updated on your boosters and is also tracking your GPS movements to know if you've been at the wrong gatherings or protests. It can measure how far you've traveled and if you're committing the cardinal sin of too much carbon emissions. Say, do, buy, travel, or translate with the wrong company, and your credits can be taxed or frozen. This becomes a tool far outside the scope of monetary policy. It becomes a digital gulag.
Of course, we've all heard of the gulags, forced labor camps maintained in the Soviet Union. These gulags became prisons used to capture, control, and enslave dissidents. And what was a dissident? Simply a person who opposed the official policy of an authoritarian state. Now imagine this digital gulag being used in countries around the world, or in the United States. In today's world, they do not need a physical gulag or prison camp. They just need to roll out the World ID system, vaccine passports, and central bank digital currency. Once they have this, they can imprison anyone they want into a digital gulag. Banking access cut off, medical access shut off, taxes confiscated automatically, and credits, which used to be money, are 100% programmable to be deleted, frozen, or removed if you practice wrongthink. Not up to date with your 12th booster shot? Financial accounts frozen. Purchasing too much meat or buying products from the wrong companies? Frozen. Attending a peaceful protest that the government deems troublesome? Frozen. Sure. I was the first person in history to be totally censored and deplatformed from social media. Sure, I was the first person to have all social media, tech companies, and financial institutions remove me from their services. That was bad, but just imagine what happens when everything is centralized into a World ID, vaccine passport, and central bank digital currency. But to make this just a little scarier, let's talk about the Chinese social credit score system, which will certainly tie into your digital money. This is from a Business Insider article in December 2021 on the system.
The Chinese Communist Party has been constructing a moral ranking system for years that will monitor the behavior of its enormous population and rank them all based on their social credit. Like private credit scores, a person's social credit score can move up and down depending on their behavior. The exact methodology is a secret, but examples of infractions include bad driving, smoking in non-smoking zones, playing too many video games, and posting fake news online, specifically about terrorist attacks or airport security. Other potential punishable offenses include spending too long playing video games, wasting money on frivolous purchases, and posting on social media.
Being discredited or blacklisted in China makes it nearly impossible to get a job, travel, buy things from stores, get a mortgage, or have children. You could also find your internet speed slowed down or be prevented from boarding an airplane. That's not to mention the public shaming component, as there is even an application that shows you the names and photos of everyone around you who is low on social credits and or in financial debt. All of this is done through algorithmic data, which allows China to monitor everything and build profiles of citizens. Today, massive surveillance cameras are not needed. Your phone is a GPS system, and everything is trackable and traceable through your internet and financial history. This is not me presenting a baseless conspiracy, as they like to say. This is all factual and occurring in real time. Then when you combine the modern features of big tech between Google, social media apps, and big banking, your entire life can be easily scored and programmed through a credit system. It is not difficult to see how a central bank digital currency of programmable financial credits would tie into an overall World ID, vaccine passport, and social credit score system. Now think about the fact Justin Trudeau openly stated that the government he admires most is China. This is from the Toronto Sun in February 2011 regarding Trudeau's deep respect for China's form of government.
There should be No surprise, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he needs more evidence before concluding China's horrific treatment of its minority Uyghur Muslim population is a genocide, despite having agreed 2 years ago that Canada's treatment of its indigenous population was a genocide. As Maya Angelou famously put it, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. While Trudeau is taking a less starry-eyed view of China these days, in 2013, as Liberal leader, he was asked during a ladies' night Liberal fundraiser what country he most admired besides Canada. He responded, "There's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Their basic dictatorship is actually allowing them to turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green. We want to start investing in solar." Thinking about the fact that countries all over the world are scrambling to launch digital IDs, vaccine passports, and central bank digital currencies, global elites see this as a necessary control tool to retain total power over the population and all social behaviors. Do you see how this all ties back to a digital wallet, which is a front for a social credit score system? The vaccine passports are the Trojan horse for a world ID integrated with a central bank digital currency and social credit score system. The breadcrumbs are all laid out ever so neatly in a row, but it gets even more dystopian if you think about what happened in Canada during the trucker protests of 2022. Under the Emergency Act, Justin Trudeau used terrorism laws to seize the bank accounts of people who donated as little as $50. Simply stated, they used emergency orders to suspend the rule of law, labeling them as terrorists, and seize their financial assets. Appearing on the Glenn Beck program, former PayPal executive David Sachs says, You have all the ingredients that Justin Trudeau was able to seize on. All you're really lacking is the emergency. Glenn's conversation with Sachs begins with the following questions. How far away from this system are we to have a true credit score? Do you see this happening sooner rather than later? And what do we do to stop it? The former PayPal executive responded, well, this is my main concern. As at the end of the day, I'm not a Canadian and I'll watch with sadness what's happening over there. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the Canadians to govern themselves. What I'm mostly concerned about is the precedent that Trudeau has set that progressive here in America might look to and implement. And let's identify the elements of the ingredients of this toxic stew that already exists over here. First of all, you've got big tech companies like my alma mater, PayPal. Companies like my alma mater, PayPal, have been freezing accounts based on working with partisan political groups to shut people out of the financial system. That practice is already taking place. Second, you've got state of emergencies in states like California, where I live, where the governor is still operating under a state of emergency. He has invoked emergency powers that never seem to end, even though we just had a Super Bowl where 30,000 people were sitting elbow to elbow without any masks on. We're still in a state of emergency. Third, we have recently the Department of Homeland Security has now defined misinformation about COVID-19 or the election to be a contributor to the terrorist threat level. So, in other words, misinformation in their view can contribute to terrorism. So, we have now all the ingredients where you have politicians invoking states of emergencies. You've got big tech companies shunning people out of the political system, and you've got this very scary and dangerous redefinition of terrorism to effectively
apply to domestic political dissent. So, you have all the ingredients there that Justin Trudeau was able to seize on, and all you're really lacking is the emergency necessary to invoke those powers. So that is what I'm afraid. That is what I'm afraid of. All I see. Sorry, some typos in this book. So that is what I'm afraid of is I see all the precedents coming together, but we have one thing in the United States that Canada doesn't have, which is a rich constitutional tradition. We have the protections under the Constitution, and I'm hopeful that our Supreme Court would protect us against an authoritarian attack on our liberties this way. However, there are many in our political system who want to pack the Supreme Court. I know this is some scary stuff, but the only way we can defeat this is to understand what's really happening. Believe me, I'd rather be on the beach retired somewhere, but let's skip the vacation for now. Skip the vacation for now and get some context to the Canadian situation. Brian Barry McAlop, Deputy Director of Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre, FinTrack, spoke before Canada's House of Commons Finance Committee. The money the organizers managed to raise was not only not cash that funded terrorism or was in any way money laundering, it was simply a way for people living in what they thought was a democratic country, believing was a safe way to express their position on an issue. These citizens subsequently evidently treated by their government as potential terrorists and money launderers were in fact fed up with COVID and were upset and just wanted to support the cause. Yes, the democratic country of Canada, one in which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on December 2020, Canada will always stand up for the right of peaceful protests anywhere around the world. Trudeau's statement was made while criticizing India for its police response to farmers' blockades in Delhi. New Delhi. So let's unpack this. Canada openly commended foreign governments for squashing legitimate protests. Then, when a protest in Canada threatened their political agenda, they used emergency orders to label them as potential terrorists and freeze their financial assets. Now, think about the Department of Homeland Security, which issued a bulletin from the National Terrorism Advisory System on February 7th, 2022, which was plastered on all news channels, which stated on their website, "The United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories, and other forms of misdis and malinformation." Stupid terms. Let me go back. The United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false and misleading narratives and conspiracy theories and other forms of dis, and malinformation introduced and or amplified by foreign and domestic threat actors. These threat actors seek to exacerbate societal friction, to sow discord and undermine public trust in government institutions to encourage unrest, which could potentially inspire acts of violence. Notice a few funny words MDM, aka misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. In other words, if you do not follow the official narrative of the rulers, you are a potential target. This is from an earlier bulletin on August 13, 2021, which stated,
These extremists may seek to exploit the emergence of COVID-19 variants by viewing the potential reestablishment of public health restrictions across the United States as a rationale to conduct attacks. Pandemic-related stressors have contributed to increased societal strains and tensions, driving several plots by domestic violent extremists, and they may contribute to more violence this year.
Yes, you read that right. If you are like half the American population and oppose COVID restrictions, you could be a terrorist. The same thing applies to those questioning electoral fraud or any issues with mail-in ballots. You could be a terrorist. And you know what that means in a digital world? Your financial credits can be frozen, your rights can be suspended, and you can wind up in a digital gulag. Funny how this all constantly goes full circle, right? Do you remember when this is all just a conspiracy theory and I was labeled a lunatic? Let's recap the simple model. Usher everyone into a world ID, a vaccine passport, and digital identification. Move everyone into a digital financial system tied together by a central bank digital currency. The digital currency will not be money, it will be credits. These credits will be all traceable, trackable, and tied to a blockchain. These financial credits can be instantly frozen, programmed to expire, or not to work for certain products or businesses, and this whole digital system will tie into a social credit score system that becomes your own digital prison. Unless you're deemed a model citizen in the eyes of the state. But remember, this is all done for your safety, security, and convenience. Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum released a report in February 2022 titled Advancing Digital Agency, which said, The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a heightened focus on the power of medical data, specifically so-called vaccine passports. These passports, by nature, serve as a form of digital identity. As you can see, this has nothing to do with health and safety. It has nothing to do with vaccines in general. The vaccine passport is the operating system for the World ID surveillance system. In other words, the vaccine passport is the Trojan horse for the digital gulag. A lot of times I am accused of being sensationalizing, fear-mongering, or being a plain old conspiracy theorist. What will happen to those EU citizens? Or if this comes to the United States, as I fear it might, what will happen to the EU citizens who don't want to participate in such an anti-human system? You won't be able to travel, or maybe like in China, you can't get an airplane ticket, or perhaps you won't even be able to have money for food unless you comply with their wishes. Has there ever been a time in human history where the rulers have not tried to get away with taking the maximum amount of power possible for themselves? The digital identity will be sold as a service that will not be mandatory. Just think how they'll try to sell it to you. The pitch will be very subtle. You don't have to submit, but if you don't, you might as well go live in the forest in a hut. I want it. That's what I want. Let's go. Imagine if your neighbor told you they needed an extra room in your house, but they couldn't force you. But they wouldn't force you. Imagine if your neighbor told you they needed an extra room in your house, but they wouldn't force you. It would just be obligatory. The COVID-19 pandemic has provided the perfect Trojan horse for the new normal digital surveillance system that will destroy your basic freedoms. One of the most alarming things about it is the fact that nearly all global governments are pushing the same digital gulag agenda. It's almost as if the World Economic Forum has bought off and penetrated the cabinets of global governments. Is this just a conspiracy? No, Klaus Schwab said it himself during a 2018 speech. Schwab described how his subversive World Economic Forum, in his own words, infiltrated governments across the world. He states, I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Angela Merkel and even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders for the World Economic Forum. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that the digital gulag agenda is being rolled out in similar verbiage across the world at the same time, and that time would be now. The Digital Identity Working Group, chaired by Australia's Digital Transformation Agency, whose member countries also include Canada, Finland, Israel, New Zealand, Singapore, and the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the World Bank through observer status, initially met in 2020 to share experiences and opportunities for the use of digital identity initiatives. They state their agenda to understand how digital identity is being used and the models that might enable mutual recognition and or interoperability to share respective governments' experiences with digital identity, including in the COVID-19 response, and to understand what is required to enable mutual recognition and or interoperability between DIWG member countries. The overall conclusion is that digital ID is a necessity for humans to share data in the new normal. The report concludes, ultimately, when applied, this enables the benefits unlocked by both mutual recognition and interoperability to be realized, including more efficient government interactions, increased support for people traveling internationally. In the future, this could also feasibly enable broader recovery from COVID-19, such as strong, mutually recognized and trusted vaccination certificates to enable safer cross-border movement. Do you see how it's always about the vaccines? Vaccine passports are the Trojan horse for advancing digital identity by NGOs. So, vaccine passports are the Trojan horse for advancing digital identity by NGOs such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, the United Nations-backed ID 2020, the World Bank's ID4D initiative, the World Economic Forum's Reimagining Digital Identity, a Strategic Imperative Program. The World Economic Forum's Digital Gulag Plan, combined with the Chinese social credit score system, is the centralized foundation for a global social credit system that will give global elites total control over citizens. Two interesting names at the forefront of this movement are Isabella Chase and Rick McDonnell. McDonnell is the executive director of ACAMS, an organization for anti-facial crime professionals. For anti-financial crime professionals. His resume also includes time at the United Nations as chief of the UN Global Program on money laundering. If we just connect the dots by the Canadian Emergency Acts on terrorism over their trucker protests, and the United States shifting focus to combat domestic terrorism at home. Can you see how this all ties together? Isabella Chase is a research fellow at the Center for Financial Crime and Security, Royal United Service Institute, RUSI. RUSI is a British think tank that works closely with the British government and military. Isabella Chase and Rick McDonald penned an article together in May 2021 in American Banker titled "The U.S. Pandemic Recovery is a Chance to Improve Digital ID." In the article, they stated, "Digital IDs could also have supported our current recovery. For example, a digital ID system could standardize and simplify the process of scheduling a vaccination appointment, which currently varies according to state and provider. In addition, digital ID could streamline and secure individual COVID-19 vaccination records for easy verification, as well as provide backup records in the event of loss or destruction of the physical cards being issued by the CDC. Finally, vaccine passports, or some version thereof, could be achieved through the use of digital ID, at the same time ensuring the accuracy and centralization of records and preventing easily falsified physical ones." The experience of COVID-19 is a case study in the potential of digital ID as an innovative way to cut down on financial crime and identity theft, and certainly to streamline administrative processes, while issues of privacy and proper use should certainly be debated and respected. The promise of digital ID is providing more efficiency and security. The promise of digital ID in providing more efficiency and security makes it well worth the exploration. The sooner the U.S. embraces digital IDs, the better prepared we will be to weather the next national crisis, whatever it is, and whenever it strikes. And when you remember that the vaccine passport digital ID system will be able to house your central bank digital currency wallet, then it all keeps making sense. They used a crisis to further a long-standing agenda. This is what I have referred to as problem, reaction, solution. A problem happens. A pandemic. The government locks everyone inside and it takes away their normal way of life. The people are afraid. They want reassurance. The global elites then offer a solution which becomes more invasive than the original problem. The solution is a global ID system ushered in by vaccine passports, which will be the operating system for your digital gulag. This digital gulag will host your medical, financial, and social credit score. Of course, it's all for your own safety and convenience, right? This is their tried and true formula. Problem, reaction, solution. And now, it's being rolled out in real time with COVID-19 and the recovery. But the goal isn't for your safety. It's about total control over your data, which will ensure our total subservience to the globalists. Chapter 7. Great Reset of Energy. We all want to save the world, but everything has its trade-offs. Would you willingly give up your freedom of movement, your ability to drive and to travel, if they told you it was for saving the planet? If they told you again that a new crisis was so severe that you had to stay inside indefinitely, would you be willing to allow global governments and big corporations to track and trace your every movement in the name of saving the planet? Would you let them automatically track your carbon based on your diet, your diet, your driving habits, and more? If they used a military style crackdown in the name of an emergency, Would you submit to a digital surveillance system to monitor your carbon emissions? These are questions worth asking because this is what they want for you. I will get to the grand plan for the climate crisis in this chapter, but let's start with the current energy crisis. In California, they've used mandates to move all their energy into renewable energy, which sounds great. But what they've done, in addition, is shut down existing energy sources without a reliable backup. In California, there's 3 nuclear reactors. They've already shut 2 down, and the third, Diablo Canyon, is scheduled to be shut down in August 2025. However, the energy situation is so bad in California that Governor Newsom is currently investigating keeping Diablo Canyon beyond the scheduled closure date. They shut down their coal power plants. They shut down their coal power plants. They shut down their natural gas power plants. But guess what? The renewables aren't close to ready yet. So what happened? Shortages. The result was energy blackouts. That's why California doesn't have reliable energy. At a time when lockdowns were shutting down energy consumption, this is from the Sacramento Bee. In May 2022, the main paper in California's state capital. Two years after the last wave of rolling blackouts, California officials said Friday that the state could face potential shortfalls in electricity this summer as drought, extreme heat, and wildfires pose threats to the fragile power grid. Leaders of the Public Utilities Commission, the state's independent system operator, and the California Energy Commission said that the state could face a shortage of as much as 1,700 megawatts, the equivalent of one major power plant, on the hottest days. In the summer of 2020, the COVID lockdowns had malls, movie theaters, and most businesses closed. Energy consumption was down, yet California still couldn't keep the lights on. Why? Even the liberal Los Angeles Times was twisting itself into pretzels of loony logic, trying to explain the problems of 2020. Careful planning to ensure adequate power supplies will become even more important as California phases out fossil fuels and moves towards 60% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% climate-friendly energy by 2045 as required by state law. Officials have consistently said that intermittent power sources such as solar panels and wind turbines didn't cause the rolling blackouts, but gas-burning power plants that can fire up when the sun isn't shining or wind isn't blowing have been shutting down in recent years, and California has largely failed to replace them with cleaner alternatives such as lithium-ion batteries. Let's try to follow their logic. Solar panels and wind turbines didn't cause the rolling blackouts of the summer of 2020 in California. However, if there had been more gas-burning power plants, there wouldn't have been any blackouts. I guess each of these statements is true, but they're not linked together in any rational fashion. Why didn't the Los Angeles Times say something like this? The shutting down of gas-burning power plants was done before we had enough capacity with solar panels or wind turbines to cover the state's energy needs. That sounds like it would qualify as objective journalism. We know the reason it wasn't reported like that. It would make the Democratic public officials of California look dumb. They couldn't do that. Only Republican public officials can be made fun of in the media. And we are starting to see the exact same thing happening in the rest of the world. Now, if you haven't seen the headlines of energy outages from Asia to South America to all across Europe, then I don't know what you've been paying attention to. This mad rush to reset energy policies by engaging in some of the same reckless actions followed by the politicians in California is a cancer infecting the rest of the world. When the former Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, came to the United States in September 2021 to address the United Nations, this is how the Washington Post described the speech.
He compared humanity to a troublemaking teen. We have come to that fateful age when we roughly know how to drive and know how to unlock the drink cabinet and to engage in all sorts of activity that is not only potentially embarrassing but also terminal. He scolded everyone for their treatment of the earth. This precious blue sphere, with its eggshell crust and wisp of atmosphere, is not some indestructible toy, some bouncy plastic romper room against which we can hurl ourselves to our heart's content. And he declared, "It is time for humanity to grow up." Very poetic, I'll admit, but pretty words don't make for a good plan. This seems to be a problem with the Democrats of California. Lots of poetry, but no rational plans. The Washington Post continued with coverage of Johnson's speech before the United Nations. "If radical action isn't taken," he said in his address, broadcast in Britain in the early hours on Thursday morning, "we will see desertification, drought, crop failure, and mass movement of humanity on a scale not seen before, not because of some unforeseen natural event or disaster, but because of us, because of what we are doing now. And our grandchildren will know we are the culprits," he said. He singled out the United States and Denmark for their pledged contributions to a $100 billion a year climate fund aimed at helping poorer countries cut carbon emissions and mitigate the effects of climate change. He also praised China for its pledge to end international financing of coal-fired energy plants, and he applauded Pakistan for promising to plant 10 billion trees. Let's go through Johnson's pitch. You have the warnings of terrible danger to put people into a state of fear. He demands radical action, not thoughtful action, not something well conceived and well executed. And is it me? Or does it seem like most of these world leaders are doing everything they can to make sure they say something nice about the communist government of China, which does not allow free speech or freedom of religion? And whenever I see $100 billion a year is going to poorer countries, I always ask myself, how much of that money is ending up in the pockets of the leaders of those countries? Is that something unreasonable to ask? I don't think so. This is the plan for the Great Reset of energy. Let me be clear, I'm not breaking down the science of climate change. I'm not talking about carbon emissions. I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad. I'm not talking about any of that. All we're doing here is pointing out the policies that are driving this, what will come of it, and how it ties into the Great Reset. Johnson said that the United Kingdom is going to be leading by example. Ironically, they're the ones having the hardest time with it. They're the ones in an energy crisis with no safe launch pad into renewable energy. Just like California, they only place Boris Johnson in leading the United Kingdom into The only place Boris Johnson is leading the United Kingdom is into a massive energy crisis, and it's already bad now. For example, Reuters reports wholesale gas prices in the United Kingdom are up over 300%, and CNN reports household energy costs in Britain will go up by more than £800, about $1,000 in American dollars, for an increase of 40%.
This was on top of an earlier increase for energy in April 2021 of 54%, as CNN reported. This news will be utterly devastating for the 6.1 million homes currently in fuel poverty and for the additional 1.7 million households who will spend this winter struggling to keep themselves warm. Simon Francis, coordinator for the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, a campaign group, told CNN Business. Unless the government acts now, it will have blood on its hands this winter, he added. The poor, whom the globalists claim to care about, are the ones most hurt by these policies, because when you can't afford your energy, it wipes out the middle class and can cause massive deaths globally. Furthermore, in the United Kingdom, there's a massive lack of fertilizer. As a result of the gas shortages, they cannot produce the fertilizer. This is how the problem was framed in November 2021 by the BBC. Even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine further complicated the matter. Svein Tore Holsether, chief executive of Yara International, said higher gas prices were pushing up fertilizer costs and affecting food prices worldwide. Fertilizer requires large amounts of gas in its production. Mr. Holsether said Yara had been forced to cut some production due to higher gas prices, which had led to shortages. The chief executive said developing countries would be hit hardest by the shortages, with crop yields declining and food prices rising. It's really scary, and we're facing a food crisis, and vulnerable people are being hit very hard, he told the BBC's Today program. As you can see, I am not exaggerating when I say that these policies are dangerous and anti-human. The alarming thing is that these things can be happening while Boris Johnson says they are leading by example for the rest of the world. This is not even about debating renewables. This is about reckless policy that's happening on a massive scale in our country with Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan. It should be obvious that when you shut down the supply of energy, but the demand is still there, it would cause serious problems because, of course, we still need air conditioning and we need heaters in the winter, and we have to keep our food cold. We have to drive our cars. If the demand stays but we shut down the supply, what do you think happens? Oh yeah, it pushes the price up, right? They are phasing out fossil fuels and in some cases even nuclear power, but they do not have the electrical grid infrastructure or the reliability of green energy to power the world. What could be more reckless than to phase out energy that millions of people depend on for survival? Without an alternative that can 100% take its place immediately. What could be more reckless than to phase out energy that billions of people depend on for survival without an alternative that can 100% take its place immediately? At this point, this should not surprise you. This is not idiocy. This is malfeasance. The plan is simple. Destroy the fossil fuel industry. Send prices soaring. Manufacture an energy crisis. Blame fossil fuels and shut down reliable global energy without a viable immediate alternative. This is what the Great Reset is all about. If you want global corporate government that rules over humanity, you have to destroy everything first. This is a classic problem-reaction solution. First, you manufacture a problem by destroying American energy. You send gas prices soaring. Heating bills skyrocket. Food prices explode because, of course, oil and gas are needed for the entire food supply chain. The cost of living gets out of control for the masses. It wipes out the middle class. Then they offer the solution: green energy. The only problem, as we discussed regarding California, is that it is not capable at this time to power the world. The result is an even worse energy crisis because now you've stifled domestic energy production. Prices are skyrocketing. You're releasing emergency oil from federal reserves. It's not helping. People can't afford electricity or gas. The middle class is being wiped out. And instead of increasing domestic supply, you wag your finger at fossil fuels and clamor about transitioning to clean energy. But it's not ready. It's as if you devise a plan to jump off your roof and land safely onto thousands of pillows, except the pillows haven't arrived from the store yet. You've been cheering about transitioning from the roof to the ground for so long that you jump anyway. The transition turns into a transfer to the emergency room, and the doctor wonders why you're stupid enough to jump off a roof if you knew the pillows weren't there. This is exactly what we're doing. The idiocy is so glaring that the only way it makes sense is if you understand the larger plan of the Great Reset. Why else would you be dangerously jumping off roofs without a fail plan? It should come as no surprise that you're not allowed to ask that question. In fact, it seems like Elon Musk is the only celebrity willing to discuss the obvious. On March 4th, 2022, Musk tweeted, "Had to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. Obviously, this would negatively affect Tesla, but sustainable energy solutions simply cannot react instantaneously." Mark Mills is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a faculty fellow at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science, where he co-directs an institute on manufacturing science and innovation. Earlier, Mills was a technology advisor for Bank of America Securities and co-author of the Huber Mills Digital Power Report, a tech investment newsletter. In 2019, Mills published a 24-page report titled "The New Energy Economy: An Exercise in Magical Thinking." From the report by Mills. So many batteries would be needed to store, say, not 2 months, but 2 days worth of the nation's electricity. So how many batteries would be needed to store, say, not 2 months, but 2 days worth of the nation's electricity? The $5 billion Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada is currently the world's biggest battery manufacturing facility. Its total annual production could store 3 minutes worth of annual U.S. electricity demand. Thus, in order to fabricate a quantity of batteries to store 2 days worth of U.S. electricity demand would require 1,000 years of gigafactory production. Then there are the hydrocarbons and electricity needed to undertake all the mining activities and to fabricate the batteries themselves. In rough terms, it requires the energy equivalent of about 100 barrels of oil to fabricate a quantity of batteries that can store a single barrel of oil equivalent energy. This is alarming for many reasons. First, it shows how far away we actually are from reliably powering the world on green energy. Second, it hits a key point that nobody discusses. It is dangerously expensive to transition our energy sources in the full force manner that global elites are attempting. As Mills points out in the executive summary of his report, it just costs more, a lot more, 6 times more. Scientists have yet to discover and entrepreneurs have yet to invent anything as remarkable as hydrocarbons in terms of the combination of the low cost, high energy density, stability, safety, and portability. In practical terms, this means that spending $1 million on utility scale wind turbines or solar panels will each, over 30 years of operation, produce about 50 million kilowatt hours, while an equivalent $1 million spent on a shale rig produces enough natural gas over 30 years to generate 300 million kilowatt hours. How are they going to actually implement all of this? Well, of course, they're going to print the money out of thin air. We already saw what happened since the COVID-19 lockdowns. Global governments printed astronomical amounts of fiat currencies and we're now experiencing dangerous levels of inflation with no end in sight. More on this later. But now they want to totally eliminate our only source of reliable energy without their clean energy being ready. So what exactly will they do to complete their transition? They will simply print trillions and trillions of dollars. The money will go to all their cronies, backdoor deals, stock options, lining the pockets of everybody in the know. Trillions of new currency units will be chasing even fewer products and Trillions of new currency units will be chasing even fewer products and services. Since we already have supply chain disasters, historic inflation levels will go much higher. The politicians will virtue signal about saving the world, and you will be eating crushed up bugs from a drone delivered directly to your house that's owned by BlackRock. Oh, and you'll be having rolling blackouts because the power grid cannot sustain us this way. Anything to save the world, right? These rallying cries for climate emergency and energy crisis are the perfect way to continue consolidating power. While it may seem like a sci-fi fantasy, soon the United States federal government could force automakers to install kill switches authorities can access and use to shut down any newer vehicle. On January 5th, 2022, Steve Symes of Yahoo News wrote an article titled New law will install kill switches in all new cars. Yes, that is real, and it's directly from the Biden administration's infrastructure bill. Here's what Symes wrote. According to an article written by former U.S. Representative Bob Barr, hidden away in the recently passed infrastructure bill, the very one I warned before would negatively impact drivers across the country if it were passed, is a measure to install vehicle kill switches into every new car, truck, and SUV sold in this country. The regulation likely won't be enforced for 5 years, so maybe there's time to do something about this. But wait, there's more. The kill switch safety system would be open, or in other words, there would be a back door that would allow police or other government authorities to access it whenever. Would they need a warrant to do that? Likely not. Even better, hackers could access the back door and shut down your vehicle. It would seem that not only do the globalists want to mess up the world's energy supply, but if you happen to be in your vehicle, they'd also like to exercise control over you. And there's more. That very same infrastructure bill includes a pilot program to track your vehicle miles. Tucked away on page 508 of the United States Senate's 2,700-page so-called infrastructure bill are plans for a national per-mile fee pilot program. And it is exactly what it sounds like. The more you drive, the more you pay. Of course, this will ultimately make travel too costly for those who are not global elites. But even more concerning than the fees are the security and privacy concerns. Possible recording methods listed in the bill include third-party onboard diagnostic devices, smartphone applications, telemetric data collected by automakers, motor vehicle data obtained by car insurance companies, data from the states that received a grant under the Section 6020 of the FAST Act, motor vehicle data obtained from fueling stations, any other method that the Secretary considers appropriate. Ultimately, I believe that the microchips and digital software in your car will sync to your personal identity just like your iPhone syncs to your iCloud. Your car will become a surveillance device to monitor, track, trace, and penalize you. And in a digital world, it will be automatically synced with your digital currency, financial accounts, and social credit score. Perhaps this is another reason why they want us all to use electric cars. By the way, how are you feeling digesting all this information? I'm pissed! I'm pissed off! I know it's a lot to absorb and can feel a bit overwhelming, so let's have a little laugh while on the subject of the climate change emergency. Man, bear, pig. Now, if you still don't believe that the global elite are deranged lunatics who will trample your basic human rights in the name of saving the planet, get a load of this headline from the Huffington Post. Could a small nuclear war reverse global warming? Nuclear war is a bad thing, right? Scientists from NASA and a number of other institutions have recently been modeling the effects of a war involving 100 Hiroshima-level bombs, or 0.03% of the world's current nuclear arsenal, according to National Geographic. The result, according to NASA climate models, could actually be global cooling. Ah, yes. Just nuke the world, kill millions of people, and we will have fewer carbon footprints. What a genius idea by such an acclaimed media outlet. Why didn't we think of this idea earlier? Why isn't every politician just campaigning for global nuclear war as the best way to save the planet and reverse climate change? In the 1980s, during the height of the campaign against nuclear weapons, there was a popular bumper sticker that read, "A nuclear bomb could ruin your whole day." Apparently, that may not be the case for the globalists. Whether it's a climate crisis or a financial crisis, there are opportunities for a consolidation of power. As I've explained, the overall goal is simple: collapse the world through massive inflation, energy crisis, and food shortages. As the first world collapses, so does the third world. Then they will send hundreds of millions of climate refugees into the collapsing first world. This will totally collapse global civilization. It will be blamed on an unfair economic system, one they prospered from, and climate change. This is when they fully institute the Great Reset and begin to completely build back better. For over 2 decades, I've been speaking to this exact plan. They will destroy reliable energy, blame it on a variety of events, from Putin to inflation to greedy energy producers. The cost of living will get out of control. They will use this as a cover for an energy transition, in which they will print tens of trillions of dollars to build a greener economy. Inflation will get even worse, and we do not have the mining and exploration capabilities to cheaply convert the world to their green energy system. So commodity prices will continue to skyrocket. Food shortages, out of control energy prices, a collapse of the third world. This will be the cover for climate refugees, because of course they will never take any blame. They will simply point the the finger at climate change, displacing hundreds of millions of people, moving them into further extreme poverty, and shutting off the global resources. Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, who flies around on private jets while lecturing us on using less energy, has painted the picture before. He said, "Wait until you see 100 million people for whom the entire food production capacity has collapsed. And with energy prices rising at uncontrollable levels and food prices skyrocketing, this is only the beginning, but the global elites do not seem interested in getting energy prices under control. In fact, it seems to be the opposite. But don't take my word for it. For example, the President of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, summed up quite nicely in her speech at the World Economic Forum's Davos event. On January 20th, 2022, she tweeted a clip of a recent speech for the billionaire crowd at Davos. In incredible irony, the background of her speech carried corporate logos for Davos Agenda and World Economic Forum. She tweeted out part of her speech and said, Today's gas crisis must serve to accelerate the transition to clean energy. For this, we also need trust. People need to trust that the transition will be fair. Businesses that it will improve their competitiveness, and investors that it will stay the course. #Davos Agenda. But don't worry, she says we need to trust that the transition will be fair. Surely, if you're ever going to trust somebody to reset the global energy system of the world, it's going to be the billionaire crowd, right? The Great Reset on energy is just another way for the Davos crowd to steal your power. In an address in November 2021, the world leaders of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland, Prince Charles set the tone for other world leaders regarding the climate. As you read it, see if you can play a little game and catch all the globalist buzzwords. Here's what CNBC reported about his comments. Prince Charles, addressing delegates at the summit, says the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated just how devastating a global cross-border threat can be. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat to the extent we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing, he says. He calls for a radical transformation of our fossil fuel-based economy to one that is genuinely renewable and sustainable. He sure sounds a lot like the rest of the gang. There's a lot of buzzwords in there. Existential threat, warlike footing, radical transformation. They need you to believe there is an existential threat and we need to do something. It's a crisis. They must seize this crisis and make it go to good use. They will do this with warlike footing. But remember, folks, when the health organizations declare it an emergency of public health, and attempt to use the fear of death and take away your freedoms again, it's for saving the world. If you haven't already noticed yet, the global elite's plans is always to declare something an emergency, an existential threat, something that could kill you. This fear they inject into the population is how they attempt to morally justify using warlike footing to take away your freedoms and continue on the path of the Great Reset. And what did President Joe Biden say at this meeting? Here's what CNBC reported. U.S. President Joe Biden warned in his COP26 speech on Monday that in an age where this pandemic has made so painfully clear that
No nation can wall itself off from borderless threats. We we know that none of us can escape the worst that's yet to come if we fail to seize this moment. Biden added that within the growing catastrophe, I believe there's an incredible opportunity, not just for the United States, but for all of us. Come on.
So what do you think they have planned? What do you think they have planned? It's not something we're going to enjoy. I can tell you that much. This is why it's important we continue to learn their plans and wake up the masses. Wake up! Thankfully, there's been a lot of great coverage on climate change, lockdowns, and the power grab that will ensue from elites declaring a climate crisis as a health emergency. One of the people providing the coverage is Tucker Carlson. Tucker has admirably covered the prospects of climate lockdowns. Here is a transcript of a great dialogue Carlson had on his show from June 22, 2021. Tucker Carlson. So we're learning more about the sad toll of the corona lockdowns in this country. According to Biden, though, we could get another round of lockdowns. These for a crisis that's every bit as bad as the coronavirus, maybe worse. That crisis, of course, says Joe Biden, is climate change. President Joe Biden, video clip transcript of Biden. Today, I'm pleased to announce the team that will lead my administration's ambitious plan to address the existential threat of our time, climate change. Folks, we're in a crisis. Just like we need to be a unified nation in response to COVID-19, we need a unified national response to climate change. And from these crises, we need to seize an opportunity to build back better than we were before, folks. Come on. I will criticize most of the mainstream media, but Tucker Carlson stands head and shoulders above most of the commentators. Notice how people like President Biden try to ingratiate themselves to you by being non-threatening. Folks, we're in a crisis. He sounds just like your favorite uncle. Tucker Carlson. A unified national response? It's involuntary. That's the one thing we know. It's involuntary. That's the one thing we know. What does it mean? Well, we're learning that the World Health Organization staffer has written a report saying that a climate lockdown could be called for, just like a COVID-19 lockdown, a climate lockdown. Mark Morano, as an author who has written a lot about climate change, he founded Climate Depot. He joins us tonight. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. A climate lockdown now. Now, I would laugh this off the table, except we all just lived through the last 18 months, so we know that anything is possible. What does this mean exactly? Mark Morano. Well, in my book Green Fraud, I detail 2 chapters on this, Tucker. The climate activists were, first of all, jealous when the COVID lockdowns happened. They were beside themselves. How is this happening? Because from Greta Thunberg to John Kerry, UN officials, and then they started saying, we need to follow this. If we can shut down for a virus, we can shut down for climate. And that's what we're seeing. There are even academics in Australia proposing adding climate change to death certificates. And Bill Gates has said the death toll will be greater. So they're following every step of the way, and it's not just a professor here or someone in academia. We have a major UK report coming out. We have an international agency report that came out calling for essentially the same type of lockdowns. Everything from restrictions on your thermostat to restrictions of moving. You can only fly in a climate emergency when it's, quote, morally justifiable. Kind of like a lockdown. You have to justify going to the store for essential services. They're going after freedom of movement. They're going after private car ownership. They're going after everything it means to be a free person and turning it over to the administrative state. There's a great deal in that exchange of which people need to take notice. These globalists always seem to get on the same page. Seriously, have you ever seen these globalists get into a fight with each other, as conservatives often do? Tucker continued, would this include shutting down the iPhone factories in China? Would China and India participate in this climate lockdown? Or is it kind of you first, America? Mark Morano. Well, as we know, the COVID lockdowns had never been proposed. We felt like lemmings following the Chinese Communist Party in terms of them recommending lockdowns. The World Health Organization went after it. The World Health Organization employees are now recommending these climate lockdowns. The one country that won't be affected is China, as you say. As we're sitting home binge watching Netflix, we're not going to be able to have the freedoms we used to have. In the UK, they proposed CO2 ration cards that the government or employers would monitor your CO2 levels, your energy use, your travel, the type of car you drive. If you exceed a level, you pay penalties. If you're under, you get credits. This is the world. A CO2 budget for every man, woman, and child on the planet has been proposed by a German climate advisor. This is what we're looking at. I talked to a German who talked about East Germany. They used to have these kinds of restrictions in East Germany before they could leave the country. But we're talking about proposing these now on Americans within the country, and we had this, of course, with COVID. They were talking about bans on interstate travel at one point, a national ban, some of Biden's advisors, so anything is possible. Chuck Schumer is urging Biden to declare a national climate emergency. Just like a blue state governor, he could have emergency powers. It would be difficult to find a more succinct conversation on the subject. Tucker plays the dreary clip of Joe Biden speaking a lot like the rest of the global elites. He uses words just like Prince Charles. The essential threat of our time, climate change, folks. We're in a crisis. Just like we need to be a unified nation in response to COVID-19, we need a unified response to climate change. We need to seize an opportunity to build back, and build back better than we were before. But there's something even more interesting. If you compare Prince Charles' quotes with Joe Biden's, they are eerily similar. Now, here goes the conspiracy theorist in me. Does it seem far-fetched to suggest the same group wrote those speeches for the two men? By now, it should be clear that when Biden says it's a crisis and we need to seize the opportunity, he's referring to Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel's philosophy. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. In my opinion, Biden's Build Back Better is simply the global elite's sanctioned political slogan for the Great Reset. But it's not just me, Tucker Carlson, Prince Charles, and Joe Biden saying that it's coming. On September 12th, 2021, the New York Post published an article titled, "Get Ready for Climate Change Lockdowns." A recent Nature journal piece notes COVID-19 lockdowns have prepared people for potential carbon allowances,
restrictions on your individual freedoms that were unthinkable only 1 year before have us more prepared to accept the tracking and limitations to achieve a safer climate.
And there's those pesky little words again: personal carbon allowances and tracking and limitations. But it doesn't stop there. The Guardian wrote a piece with the following title and subtitle: Equivalent of COVID emissions drop needed every 2 years.